Hi, BookTube, it's Amy, and I'm back again reading from the Anatomy of Bibliomania by Holbrook Jackson. Today we are on page 322 with a section titled Life Imitates Letters. William Corey asks what apostolical succession more interesting than the tradition of thought and sentiment. He sees whole generations of men, mighty movements, and destinies determined and molded by books. The gentlemanly behavior of our squires in the Civil War, brought about for the translation of Tasso by Squire Fairfax. The interpretation given by Henry Wotton to woman worship in his poem to Elizabeth of Bohemia, telling on Elton lads such as Robert Boyle. John Evelyn in his diary, showing how his character was formed by books. Sunderland, husband of Sacrissa, Lovelace and Wogan all warmed by Philip Sidney. The charm and spell of Van Dyck's portraits being both effect of Spencer Sidney Raleigh literature and cause of Cavalier and Roundhead nobleness. He traces the fact that our men were more chivalrous in the three wars with France between George I and the Revolution than their forefathers of the Crecy Agincourt days, and the behavior of Frenchmen towards Britons and vice versa more courteous to literature, not to religion. Lord Chatham, Apped Green, comes out as a sort of Joshua. Was he not moved by books? Rachel Russell, a sort of she-apostle to the governing families. Lucy Hutchinson and Margaret Newcastle helped towards lady worship, and the fruit of this growth in Fanny Burney's life. Every character described by literature, in fact, the germ of characters and fragments of characters, the stuff of creation, protoplasm, making or marring men, women, lives, eras, even nature itself is molded by books. Darwin makes us see the evolutionary processes which he saw, and if Mary Coleridge is a reliable guide, Wordsworthian animals abound in our Lake District. The cows and sheep looking as if they knew the Ode to Immortality by heart. Oscar Wilde would have that literature always anticipates life. It does not copy it, but molds it to its purpose. Hamlet invents modern thought. The world has become sad because a puppet was once melancholy. He cites stories of boys who pillage the stalls of unfortunate apple women, break into sweet shops at night, and alarm old gentlemen who are returning home from the city by leaping out on them in suburban lanes with black masks and unloaded revolvers. After reading the adventures of Jack Sheppard and Dick Turpin, which many of our magistrates have supported when passing judgment on naughty boys made criminal by penny dreadfuls. The mature are in like manner affected, if we are to believe Sir Henry Wotton, who will have that Felton became an assassin through the incentive of Egglesham's book against the Duke of Buckingham. Wilde tells also of a governess who, soon after the appearance of Vanity Fair, became a veritable Becky Sharp, running away with the nephew of her employer and making a great splash in society in the manner of a Mrs. Rawdon Crawley. Of a noble gentleman who, a few months after the new comes has reached a fourth edition, dies with adsum on his lips, of a certain Mr. Hyde, who, shortly after Mr. Stevenson published his curious psychological story of transformation, tramples upon a child by accident and takes refuge from the angry mob in a surgery, the door of which happens to be open. These strange incidents are accidental, unconscious to those who act in them, but books rule their destiny. They know not why or how. It is another instance of nature imitating art, for as he argues, life is art's best, art's only pupil. He farther holds that the nihilist was invented by Turgenev and completed by Dostoevsky, that the 19th century as we know it was largely an invention of Balzac. Our Lucien de Rubempré, our Rastignac's and de Marseille's making their first appearance on the stage of the Comédie Humaine. Young men, he adds, have committed suicide because Rolla did so, have died by their own hand because by his own hand Werther died. Think, he asks, what we owe to the imitation of Christ, what we owe to the imitation of Caesar. Thus do books have their way with men, making them or unmaking them, as when the first glowing impression of the metamorphoses of Apollonius gives Marius a new revelation of life and never loses power over him. Or when Dorian Gray opens the yellow book Lord Henry Wotton had sent him, and finds it the strangest book he had ever read, for it makes him feel that in exquisite raiment and to the delicate sounds of the flutes, the sins of the worlds were passing in dumb show before him. He cannot free himself from its influence. It takes control of his life. It seems to him to contain the story of his own life before he had lived it. Beneath its sway, he becomes more and more enamored of his own beauty, more and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. In this strange book, he reads Huysmans' careful record of that curious degenerate, Florices de Estenes, how he intoxicates himself with exotic books, Latin, of the decadents, morbid romantics, and oversensitive moderns, symbolists, Parnassians, as Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Baudelaire, and Barbey d'Aurevilly, Stéphane Mallarmé, Arthur Rimbaud, and Paul Verlaine, thus exhibiting the spiritual disturbance which afflicts so many in these times, and which forces him ever to be seeking some new and strange sensation, which he finds ultimately to his taste in Barbey d'Aurevilly. I should really look up who that is because I have no clue, but that's been mentioned several times. Whose gamey flavors, whose strains of disease and decay, that cankered surface, that taste of rotten ripeness, which he so loved to savor among the decadent writers, Latin and monistic of the early ages. He also finds in the contorted epithets and beauties of Verlaine a like overripe flavor, the plants d'automne et frisons d'hiver of Mallarmé have a diction so magnificently ordered that it lulled the senses like some mournful incantation, some intoxicating melody with thoughts of an irresistible seductiveness, stirring the soul of the sensitive reader whose quivering nerves vibrate with an acuteness that rises to ravishment, to pain itself. It is books thus conceived that please him, books which appeal only to an ideal reader by a mental collaboration of consent between half a score of persons of superior intellect scattered up and down the world, a delectable feast of epicures appreciable by them only. Only the decadence of a literature moves him as being attacked by incurable organic disease, enfeebled by the decay of ideas, exhausted by the excesses of grammatical subtlety, sensitive only to the whims of curiosity that torment a fever patient, and yet eager in its expiring hours to express every thought and fancy, frantic to make good all the omissions of the past, tortured on its deathbed by the craving to leave a record of the most subtle pangs of suffering which was incarnate in Mallarmé in the most consummate expression. These distinct effects are as much due to the reader as the writer, for as I have erewhile hinted, reading is a partnership, and as Vernon Lee holds, the writer's intention is limited by the tempers and experience of the reader. Our footnote pointing us to handling of words. Sometimes, and there is good evidence in support of the claim, the reader is more stout-hearted than the writer, going farther than he would go, believing more than he believed, taking more risks than he would have taken. I find a good instance in Lanson's account of Rousseau, whom he advertises as a poor, dreamy creature approaching action only with alarm and with every manner of precaution, and who understands the applications of his boldest doctrines in a way to reassure conservatives and satisfy opportunists. Thus, in the end, the work detaches itself from the author, lives its independent life, and heavily changed with revolutionary explosives which neutralize the moderate and conciliatory elements Rousseau has put into it for his own satisfaction. It exasperates and inspires revolt, and fires enthusiasms and irritates hatreds. It is the mother of violence, the source of all that is uncompromising. It launches the simple souls who give themselves up to its strange virtue upon the desperate quest of the absolute, an absolute to be realized now by anarchy and now by social despotism. Thus does the disciple outrace the master and overshoot his target. But the reader goes farther even than that. He may not only exaggerate or otherwise distort the writer's ideas, but he may and does involuntarily alter it to meet his own idea of that idea, even putting in things which are not there. He who had thought he had understood something in my work, Nietzsche complains, had, as a rule, adjusted something in it to his own image, not infrequently the very opposite of myself. And finally, all the other influences of time and place and mood, health, weather, and so forth contribute to the process of distortion, that halo of vague something else, which, in addition to the succession of images determined by the words of the writer, induces in the reader a simultaneous continuum in which all takes place. And the reader's own experience, moving beneath the pressure of the word, brings into consciousness how many sights, how many feelings of which the author of that word can have no notion. In the end, it often happens that the Darwinians are more Darwinian than Darwin, or so deflected from the path of the master's idea that they fill him with fear and even abhorrence, and are often repudiated by him. And yet, in these deflections, the power of books is both checked and established. For the way in the inmost sanctuary of a book is through the spirit of the reader. The best disciple goes beyond the master. Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves, and only when ye have denied me will I come back unto you. From Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And that brings us to the end of that section there on how life imitates letters. Readers taking books, taking pieces of literature, and essentially giving them a life of their own. Or in some cases, it's not clear, with those earlier stories, such as the woman running away with the wealthy nephew, whether she had read Vanity Fair or whether it was pure coincidence that led to that. And perhaps things had been happening all along like that, and it was only noticed because the totem was set out by the work of literature for people to take note of such an occurrence or such a pattern. But the next part here on page 326 is titled Men Who Become Books, Biblianthropos Defined. And that one is, once again, quite a lengthy one. That's going to take us all the way to page 333, but we'll end it there and come back in the next video.